I want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of what's a very important conversation. How do we put together the tools and the knowledge that we bring from the various aspects of the beef business and actually guide those tools towards adding profitability for us and our families? And so I'm going to spend a little time talking about some slightly different topics than some of the other folks who will present. But I think all of it dovetails together, and I think some of their commentary, of course, will plug into this brief visit as well. So the primary goal today is to talk a little bit about the desire, the incentive, maybe me urging you to consider how important data capture is in your aspect, your component, your subset of the beef business. So I want to just take a second and let's just deal in some hardcore realities and some steep truths. We like to talk, we meaning everybody, likes to talk about all the things that are available to us, all the opportunities, all the big picture pieces that can get people excited when they read an article, but then they go back home and they got to figure it out. That makes it more challenging. So I just want to cut to the core just a little bit. You and I know that when it comes to the effort, the aggravation, and the time it takes to capture, track, organize, and then sort through valuable data in any aspect of your farming operation, the truth is that for most of us, we hate this. We hate it. Not because we don't like the answers. We love the answers. We don't have the time, or at least perceive that we don't have the time. So what is the answer? Well, long before we can decide how and what we're going to capture, we have to convince ourselves that there's a real reason to do this. Or, in parlance that has become fairly commonplace in the modern world, you have to know your why. And if you don't know your why, you will not have the motivation to stick with the how or the what. It's just as simple as that. So if we spend our time today focused purely on how we're going to put together a pile of data to benefit you, we're probably going to miss the mark just a little bit. Because I think you and I could both speculate that Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady don't really like film study all that much. They like what it does for them. If you by chance have a college student, you know that likely the hours they spend in chemistry class or physics or what have you, for most of them, isn't a particular joy. It is a step. It's a means for them. Or your insurance agent taking their annual test, or your banker keeping up with all the legal wranglings that go on in their sector, or your tire pressure in your tractor, or your corn plots, or setting up your new iPhone. None of these things are terribly fun, but they're terribly necessary. Before we talk about the terribly necessary, let's make sure we get to the point. Why is data important? And for most of us involved in the commercial beef sector, it really comes down to one very simple, pointed question. And before I ask this question, I recognize that there are a number of folks who are going to hear this conversation who are pretty well seasoned in the beef business, and they've had a lot of good fortune along the way, and as a result, they own most of their piece of the world outright. Their cows are paid for. They don't have to communicate with their banker terribly much. And so they're all good. But before we ignore the rest of this conversation, I simply ask those of you who happen to be in that position this question. Can your kids and grandkids run this beef outfit the same way you have and have a snowball's chance of staying in business 20, 25 years from now? And I'll let you ruminate over that for a second, because if we don't touch this question, if we don't broach this as our why, then it's going to be very hard to implement any sort of data capture component at any portion of our business. We're not going to have the commitment to making that happen. So this is the question I would encourage you to continue to ponder. Or, to make it simple, what is your why? This is mine. These are my two grandsons checking out their own bovines, or in this case, maybe their families. And the question is can these two young men find a place in this business 25 years from now? I think unquestionably they can. But unquestionably they won't be doing it the same way their folks and their grandparents have been doing it. And so that's my why. I'd encourage you to find yours before we ponder this much further. One of my favorite words, veritas, Latin for truth. Most of you likely already knew that. And we know that there are a lot of folks who are very skilled, shall we say, at encouraging us to try a new program or a new product. And they can incentivize us by giving us this or teasing with that or promising something in the future. But the question is, how often do they actually bring facts to the table? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That's just life. Our job is to discern through all of that noise and actually find some facts that you and I can use to better our plight, our business opportunities, our profit potential in the beef business. So before we go down that road, let's just remind ourselves of some very honest and maybe in cases painful truths. It is hard to make a profit at the cow-calf level. It just is. And we're not all seeking the same things. For some of us, this operation needs to be quite profitable. For some of us, it's a bit more of a sideline or a fringe benefit of some other operations. Or for some of us, it being closer to breaking even might be more appealing for various tax mitigation strategies and the like. Some of us use it primarily for the purpose of land acquisition over time. And so there are different purposes, but at the end of the day, the bulk of us are trying to make profit, not just revenue, profit in this sector. So we're going to have to recognize that it's flat hard to do. But we also need to recognize that there's a large number of folks who are running cows that if profit's the primary motivator, might be well to consider some slightly different approaches. Should they actually manage cows for somebody else on their piece of property for a cost per head? Should they look at stockers? Should they ponder a whole host of different things? And so we just want to make sure that we get that piece on the table. Another painful truth. This one is not often well received. But if you're selling small groups of calves through a regional sale barn, the one thing we all want is leverage. And let's just accept the truth. If you're selling small groups, you're not going to get that. It's not going to happen. However, that doesn't mean you can't add value, because there are so many ways, in particular in 2021, to add value. In some cases, yes, we all know folks have jumped on various niche marketing aspects that are going on and that are popular now. Great. And if you're winning from that, kudos to you. That's adding value. For some of us, it is collaborating with others so we can move larger groups of calves at one time, even though there might be multiple owners. Great. Kudos on you. That's adding value. And in that case, likely leverage. But even for those who aren't in a position to do those things, where they're still going to be selling small calves, remember, at every regional sale facility on every sale day, somebody's trying to fill out the back end of a vehicle, the back end of a truck. Maybe they got spots for 15 or 20 or 25 more head. And if you bring animals that have documented knowledge and value, besides just hype or whatever me as the owner might say, oh, well, they're great, or what somebody might sing from the block. If you can bring documented facts, well, they're going to fill out that back of that truck with somebody. They're more inclined to buy cattle that have facts behind them than not. So again, you may or may not have leverage in that point, but you certainly can add value. Your feeder calves, for most of us, are our primary revenue source in our beef business. and your long-term profit potential, mostly through the view for a lot of us of the way those potential buyers or those marketers view our product year over year over year, is determined very simply by a handful of things you already know. And so those decisions that impact your management, nutrition and health, and your genetics, those are crucial, and we all know those things. That's not anything terribly surprising. But if you shortcut any of those, you shortchange that calf. And in turn, you shortchanged your wallet, and in turn, you shortchanged your family. So, too many folks, myself included, so I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here, I'm talking to myself as well. We love to lament and be philosophical about things that the truth is we'll never be able to control. We can talk about them, we can gripe about them. Many times there are even steps and strategies we can implement through various groups we belong in, through associations, political processes, and all those things that we can have impact on. But for the most part, it seems a lot of us, it's basic human nature, again, myself included, like to spend more time talking about the things that we have zero control over and would prefer to ignore the discussion about the things that we can control. And I think that's an honest human truth beyond just an honest cow truth. And my last thing that I'll point out is cows aren't a religion. And you might go, huh? Well, I have a religion, thank you very much, and it's quite important, and it isn't cows. And I bring this up because way too many folks treat their cows as the infamous sacred cow, meaning she can't be questioned. Or maybe more appropriately, the more pointed part, the part that hurts a little bit more is you can't question my decisions, my approach that built that cow or that cow herd. She's an untouchable. Well, once you make your cow a religion, it's really hard to find profit in this business because you're vested in something regardless of whether it makes sense or not. And again, we're all guilty of these things. And then on top of those painful things, there are other things that are exciting, scary, inventive, unnerving, that are changing our supply chain drastically. And so I don't bring these things up to be fearful of them. I think bring them up because it's better to know so I can adjust accordingly. So one of those would be the beef on dairy conversation. If you aren't aware, this is a massive effort industry-wide. Give or take the math, you look at somewhere between a quarter and a fifth of the bovine females in this country are dairy cattle. And increasingly, we're going to get to a spot about 2/3 of those are AI bred to elite beef bulls. That is a major supply chain for buyers that is predictable and known. They're a competitor. We need to understand that. Things that are large supply chain collaborations, like the work that Walmart's doing with 44 Farms and their Prime Pursuit effort. Regardless of how far that actually goes, the level of success that they put in place, there's no question they are changing the landscape from stem to stern of the beef business. And I don't think any of us would possibly say that that's likely the last version of that sort of integrated relationship that we're going to see. Again, not good or bad, it's just an observation of things that are happening. Of course, we know there are plant-based alternatives, 3D printed alternatives of actual meat, if you're not familiar. So a lot of things that are going on out in the marketplace that we need to be aware of. And yet, this is purely my opinion, but as somebody who spends time studying a lot of metrics and studying a lot of data, I'm convinced that there's as much promise, there's as much opportunity as there's ever been in the last number of decades to make a profit in this business, even despite some of the things that we've already discussed and I've already mentioned. But the one thing I think we all know, and it goes back to the question I asked you a few moments ago, is will we be able to continue to do things the same way? I would argue we're going to be forced to be more nimble and more willing to implement the appropriate, well thought out, well researched changes to allow us to chase those dollars that I believe are out there when we look at the demand for beef, the opportunity for beef, and so on. More or less, let's not leave things to chance. Some of you might have actually seen this animal before. This is actually a statue that resides in the Palo Duro Canyon, just south of Amarillo, Texas. And I think this is a picture that is appropriate. Yes, we all enjoy entertainment and games, just not when it comes to making money in our cows. So the goal here is to talk about the importance of data tracking. And I don't want to belabor this point, but I want us to all make sure we're on the same page, that it's the data that allows us a thorough understanding of the financial aspect of our business, and then to leverage that to outside parties. Sometimes it's to our banker. Sometimes if that financial aspect is proving the profitability of a set of terminal calves, the profit potential of a set of feeder steers. If I can prove financials to somebody buying those cattle, they're much more likely to jump. And a lot of times we'll hear folks talk about, well, I just want price differentiation to be real. I want folks to pay more for my cattle because they're better than somebody else's. Prove it. How do you know they're better? Why do you suspicion they're better? Why do you say they're better? Because you have metrics to prove it, or because that's your gut feel? And you might be right, even if it's just gut feel, but folks aren't going to put their own business on the line for somebody else's intuition. At one time, that certainly happened. That was frequent in this business. In particular, somebody in my background, I'm very familiar with the way cattle buying sector worked. I understand very intimately how those relationships once were. Those are a lot different than they were just 20 years ago. And now the expectation is clear. You need data. And if you want to know, is price differentiation real? Absolutely. There's no question. It already exists in the business. You no longer have to wait on it. One example of the data that would prove this, and there are countless others, the Superior Livestock Auction data, largest marketer of feeder calves in this country by a large drove, clearly can show over and over and over the various pieces that add value to your calves above the norm and those things that don't. So these things are real. And in some cases, those kind of financial decisions will cause you to do things that many cow-calf producers would never consider, such as retaining ownership on their steers or things of that. So once a person's like, sure, okay, fine, I need to track a little better than what I've been doing. I get that. What do I track? Well, again, as a reminder, let's track those things we can control, because the rest of them just are going to confuse us and cause us some noise. And so a good portion of those things are going to be management driven. And so as you're collecting those, I think some things are going to come to the fore. One, in a cow-calf operation, the number one predictor of your profit potential is cow cost. And that also goes into not only the cost of maintaining that cow, but the longevity of that cow, right? Because then that looks at heifer retentions, and the more heifers I've got to keep to replace cows because they're turning over too quickly, that inflates cow costs, because that goes into her just a little bit. And we know that in the last number of years, cow longevity has been a serious problem in our business, as a lot of serious feed stock breeders, and I'm not saying this is a wrong decision, it's just an observation of the way things are, have been aggressively pursuing terminal metrics, feedlot gain, and carcass merit. Cow longevity has suffered some, and we know this to be the case. And so the short-term cow, as I say there, is a long-term problem. And here's an example. This is some data from a group in Kansas that's one of the better databases to track the financials of major beef firms. And this data is compiled by Dr. Neville Spear. Some of you may know of Dr. Spear's work. And Neville and I talk about these things frequently. And I think this graphic, kind of busy, so let me walk you through it. But I think it says a great deal. And you can see the time frame. It goes up to a few years ago. The blue bars are the producers in this data set that are in the top third of overall profitability. The yellow are those in the middle third of profitability, and the red are those in the bottom third. And what you see then in the bar graph is annual cow cost. And what you see is those who are the least profitable programs consistently have the highest cow cost, and totally vice versa for the blue lines. And if I could add a whole nother graph, though I didn't, just to drive this point home a little bit, if you actually look then at the actual profit or return on investment per cow of these different groups, what you would see is over this same timeline, those in the blue section, those most profitable third, consistently most years eke out a profit. Sometimes it's not a lot, but they tend to, for the most part, consistently eke out a profit. Those in the middle third will go back and forth, though they struggle to actually turn a profit most years. And the red bars, even in some of the years we saw 5 and 6 years ago, those in the lower 1/3 with the highest cow cost never, almost never turn a profit. Cow cost is a major impact, and we all know that. So tracking that data gives us the opportunity to consider those things. And if we look at the short-term cows, a long-term problem sort of thing, here, again, not to pick on any breed, I could talk about a bunch of breeds in this case, but here's one just because they are the big dog in the business, and we know this to be the case. The Angus group has done a phenomenal job in terms of adding growth and performance and terminal metrics, clearly. But this is actually pulled from one of their own geneticists, one of their own science team. And to his credit, I appreciate Dr. Miller's boldness to say the right things, even in the tough situations. And if you read in this blue section, even Meat Animal Research and AAA have recognized that the Angus is now the largest cow in the beef business. Again, it's not a positive or a negative. I'm pointing out the facts so that we can make decisions that we consider how to use our data. Or let's point out this third bullet here in this section. When do I breed or calve, or should I sell this kind of calf or this weight, or should I hold him for a little while? Quick story. Have a friend who has a family member who is out west, and so they deal with brandings and that kind of thing. And his profitability was clearly lacking because of the fact he was overfeeding his cow herd because of the time of year he's calving. He was having to feed too much. And so they did some math, and they could shift their breeding season by just a few months, hit a better marketing window for calves, and lower cow costs. This fellow refused to do it when he realized the following, that when he went to branding time, where large groups of people all branded together, he would be embarrassed because his calves would be the lightest ones. Even though it was clear it would be a significant profit-focused decision for him, his family, and his banker, pride got in the way for him to do things differently than he'd always done. Pride's a tough one. Oh, crazy things. Hey, so I don't castrate my bull calves, or I don't knock the horns off. Guess what? You're going to get taken to the woodshed, and it just is the way it is. So nutrition. You all are the forage experts on here. I'm not going to dare tell you what you should track or how you should track it, but I can assure you that at the end of the day, without this knowledge, most of us are just floundering. And frankly, a lot of folks in the beef business don't put near enough effort into this. A painful one for a lot of folks. Can I honestly afford a hay equipment? When you pencil out, and you all know this better than I do, when you pencil out the cost of this equipment, the fuel, the time, how much can I afford to get hay? How much could I defer a few cows and stockpile some forage? How much could I afford to pay somebody else to do it? Somebody might argue, well, my hay won't be at its pinnacle. It won't be at its best spot in the year. How much extra money could I use to say, okay, the hay's not perfect. I'm going to have to supplement it a little bit this year. Honestly speaking, when we look at the many, many tens of thousands it takes to keep hay equipment around, for a lot of producers, how much more could they pay on an annual basis to supplement maybe a subpar hay crop and still be far better off? Again, we do what we do sometimes just because, well, we do it. Or body condition scores. Do you realize that some cows need more fat on them than others to be reproductively efficient? Use straight breed cattle, or you look at some straight bred British in particular. They're typically going to require more fat reserves to get bred and stay bred than some of their composite or crossbred counterparts. If you're not an expert in nutrition, and I would say most of us humans aren't based on our own doctor bills, let's make sure we call in those folks who can aid us. And some will say, well, Chip, it's okay because I'm going to solve this because my data is going to tell me I'm just going to sell heavier calves and I'm going to dig myself out just by selling heavier calves. This is easy. Dave Lawman's work from OSU, used to be on faculty at Mizzou many, many years ago, has shown, if you look at this, and I could use a whole bunch of breeds here, but to keep it simple, this black line is Angus. And what it shows is that Angus weaning weights in the seed stock population have consistently grown over the last 20 years. Yet, if you look at these other populations of commercial cow herds, weaning weights haven't moved a lick in the same period of time. So we've made better genetics for growth, but for the most part, they don't get expressed on ranch or on farm. They don't get expressed to the feedlot. It would appear by most folks in the industry that our on-farm management is capping how far, or our on-farm resources are capping how far our on-farm weaning weights can go. The growth is there. Most of it just manifests itself in the feed yard. So if you think that in mass, clearly individual operations are different. But if we think in mass that the answer is, well, I'm just going to make heavier weaning weights, Beta says that's just simply not going to happen. Or we can talk about health. We have to be prepared to set these calves up for success in a feed yard. If we don't vaccinate appropriately, if we're not providing a post-weaning preconditioning period, we're adding as much as 30% risk for that calf to get sick or die. I was in South Missouri a couple years ago giving a conversation to a large group of extension people. It was a great talk. I brought a fellow from me from the feedlot sector, and we had just a phenomenal evening. But I did have one guy push back on me a little bit when we talked about this. He said, well, Chip, I've tried to wean my own calves. I've tried to deal with them on farm. And you know what happened? I had a couple calves get sick and die. He said, I can't do that anymore. I was like, amen, brother. That's exactly what the person who's buying your calves knows. That if you don't do these things on farm, he's taking all that risk on. And as a result, he has no choice but to pay you less because he knows these things are serious risk to his business and his enterprise, and he's charged to make money as well. Or we can spend a little more time. We talked about a bit of management, nutrition, those things that you all are more capable in. Let's talk a bit about genetics. That's going to be a bit more in my wheelhouse. And so some key reminders or some honest truths when it comes to genetic merit and tracking it. Wherever your seed stock supplier is going, so are you, only slower. So if you buy your cattle, your sires, from a couple of great outfits or a single great outfit, and they're doing good things, you're going there. You're not going to get there as fast as they are because they're out there a few years ahead of you when you look at the mating and breeding and growth decisions that go in before you ever get a sire. You buy your bull at the sale barn, that's where you're going to. And we got to be thinking about tying ourselves to folks who are taking us places that are valuable. And so I caution you to really think about the efforts, integrity, and oomph of your seed stock supplier. Also, certain traits are more heavily influenced by genetics. Growth traits, and that does include calving knees as primarily a growth trait, and carcass merit. These things are highly genetically driven, or they're highly heritable. Certain traits are a bit more lowly heritable. They still have a genetic component, but the management aspects or the environmental aspects are much heavier. So such a things as cow longevity. While there's a genetic component, certainly, there are other things that you're going to do on farm that are going to have a bigger impact. Or fertility. A lot of folks tell me, well, Chip, I'm just selecting for the genetics of highly fertile cattle because I always select the females who get bred first or who don't get culled because they're open. Well, I appreciate that. And that doesn't mean you're not selecting the cows that are more successful in your management operation. But because fertility is so lowly heritable, you're almost certainly not actually selecting for more fertile cattle. You're mostly just selecting for cattle who are biologically more effective in your management system. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. Let's just make sure we know what we're looking at. Maybe the most powerful management tool that we can implement at the ground level is a responsible crossbreeding program. While this clearly considers genetics and breed type and all those things, it is hugely impacting on lowly heritable traits. So a crossbred female, she will outlast straight-bred females just routinely. That's her job. She will wean a responsibly crossbred female. I didn't even put the data up here, but she will generate almost a full extra calf in her lifetime than her straight-bred counterparts. Responsible crossbreeding works. And to drive that home, I guess I have to put it on the screen. Straight breeding is not a profitable strategy if you're in the commercial cow-calf sector. Or to be really coarse and to be really blunt, if you're a commercial outfit, you're straight breeding your cattle, you're doing it wrong. Heterosis and responsible crossbreeding are likely the biggest friends to reducing cow cost, annual cow cost, and increasing longevity of any singular thing we can do, provided you are sourcing the right kind of genetics when you do that cross. Now, if we're going to track all of these things, whether it's health or nutrition, or in particular the things I'm going to talk about in genetics, there are lots of different sources and systems to use. I'm not going to tell you which system you need to be using to track that, but pick one and get started. And that could be as simple as an Excel sheet or a software program that you purchase, or a software program like The SimGenetics Active Herd that I'm closely tied to, that's a free software for any of our members. What are your goals from a genetic standpoint? Well, there are exceptions, and I understand that. Some of us have different ideas on why we're in the business. But for the overwhelming majority of us, it is very simple. It is profit. And again, I drive home the fact that I mentioned earlier, we live in an era where we talk about bigger and bigger checks, more and more revenue. But we don't often discuss profit. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that matters. That's the thing that keeps you and your family with the quality of life that you expect. And that's also, to be quite blunt, what's going to encourage your kids or grandkids to come back to that business, to invest in being a part of that business long term. Sometimes when it comes to genetics, we really get excited about maximizing outcomes. I would encourage you to look at optimizing outcomes. How do things balance? If we maximize outcomes, you and I can go to Illinois, we can go up to the deep black dirt. We know a lot of corn producers up there who are going to just push some insane numbers in terms of bushels. And we know we go sit at the coffee shop and there'll be a whole bunch of folks bragging. And then over in the corner, there's another fellow quietly drinking his coffee in his old bibs who could buy all of them a couple times over because, yeah, he may not maximize his bushels the same way they do, but he's maximizing profit. And when that coffee shop visit is over, that guy will go home and he'll probably buy some neighbor's ground, and some of the rest of them are going to be talking to their banker because they got to have some tough conversations. So maximizing outputs and optimizing outputs are two different things, and it's very important for us to understand the difference. And we got to capture this data if we're going to measure that progress. And then one last thing I would point out here is one of the linchpins in determining what your genetic direction needs to be is one fairly simple, but it's one very fundamental decision. Do you raise your own females or do you buy them? I'm not suggesting one or the other is better. That's a conversation for another day. But that decision does impact the sire, the type of sires, the program that you put in place from a repro and a genetics standpoint. So once you do buy into the fact that I have to track this knowledge and you get the software available, you're going to start to get a bunch of numbers flying at you. And so you say, yeah, I got a lot of data, but data without tools to interpret that data, frankly, is just a lot of confusion and noise. And so we need tools. Some of you might recognize that tool. That'd be an artist rendition of a tool that certainly changed the world, Gutenberg printing press. Or this hillbilly's a little more comfortable with tools like this. This can save my world on a somewhat routine basis. And so we need tools to make sense of all this data so we don't just have confusion. And when it comes to the genetics business, despite what anybody tells you, the facts are what the facts are. And the best tool in the genetics business is a well-crafted index that comes from well-fashioned, credible EPDs. That's the target. That's how we get there. And so, real quickly, there's a handful of ways to do this. There are four major approaches. This is assuming I'm essentially culling out that approach where somebody's like, I don't even care about this stuff. I'm just buying the bull who came through right before the special cow sale that, yeah, I know nothing about him. He looked kind of cool. I'm going to take him on and breed him on heifers. I'm discounting that. If you're that producer, I'm sorry. I'm just not considering that as a viable option. So we're going to talk about the other four as I understand them. Sire knowledge alone, assuming you're sourcing well-respected, knowledgeable cattle. Sire knowledge, meaning using the genetic knowledge of that sire as a proxy for genetic knowledge for your calves, is certainly a viable strategy, and it has merit. The pros of that, it's easy. It doesn't add added cost, and if you're sourcing the right kind of bulls to fit your management strategy, you know they're fitting, and you're getting some rough understanding of the kind of calf crop that you're going to get. And it also opens doors to some of the feeder calf verification programs that are out there. So that's valuable. Here's one of those feeder calf programs now, the IGS Feeder Profit Calculator. But there are also some cons to this approach. You get essentially no understanding within herd or within the calf crop. There are clearly major differences, and you'll never know them. And that comes most important when you make retention decisions for daughters. It's the least genetic insight of the options I'll mention, and it's the slowest genetic advancement of the various approaches we'll take. Again, that doesn't mean it's not valuable, and to be honest, it's the one that most folks in the beef business are going to consider. Second approach we'll talk about is coupling that sire knowledge with a commercial DNA test. By a commercial DNA test, I'm going to talk about one of the kind of 30,000 foot view tests sort of like a neogen identity test. And so we're coupling that known sire and these together. It's reasonably simple and easy. It only takes the sire knowledge plus a chute side tissue sample that you send off. It gives you some metrics to make heifer retention decisions, and that's hugely valuable. And it does give you within herd comparisons. And so you can, that's a great step. It gives you the ability to select, again, in particular within your females, who's a good bet as a long-term cow prospect and who isn't. The cons of this approach. Now, for those of you who say, well, I want to get really deep in genetic evaluation, the commercial DNA tests don't do that. That's not what they're built for. They're a bit too superficial for that. It is focused on a within herd comparison, not an industry-wide comparison. So when somebody says, well, how do your cattle compare to so-and-so's down the road? It's really not set up to do that nearly so effectively. It mostly gives you an in-herd look. And again, that's valuable. But at times, Chip might have to look in the mirror and go, you know what? My whole herd's a problem. I've made some decisions that caused me some challenges. I need to be thinking about how over time I divest myself of my current genetics and bring in some more. Or maybe it turns out my genetics are phenomenal. I need to be selling females to the outside market. I won't know that using these tools because it's not set up to give me an industry-wide comparison. And for most folks, it's just price prohibitive to actually do these things on their steers or on their terminal females. It's just too much dollars out there in terms of the ROI. And then the other thing is, again, it provides a moderate level of knowledge for a moderate level of expenditure. And so again, you get what you pay for. It makes sense. Third approach is structured genetic evaluation. Now this starts to get for folks who are pretty passionate about collecting data. This can be difficult or it can be easy. There are different ways to get there, but it's using the data you have to give a much grander understanding. And you're coupling pedigree awareness, sire and dam knowledge and their generationals back, along with phenotypes, or we'll call those the actual performance measures of different animals. When you couple those things and you turn those in the right fashion, you get very significant genetic awareness on par with your seed stock provider in many cases. You get EPDs and indexes that you can use for major decision making. That means, in particular, female metrics, on occasion, even maybe looking at an internal sire as a potential bull prospect or selling that prospect. And these EPDs and indexes, depending upon the system you use, can be on the same platform that your seed stock provider. So they're directly comparable. So that then when you go to source a bull, both your seed stock provider has knowledge about your cow herd because you can give them some metrics, plus you can look at that bull's EPDs if you're using the right system and directly compare. Gives you much more precision for some of those fundamental pieces. And the cost can be really inexpensive if done appropriately, in particular for cow-calf operations. For example, you can get into a structured genetic eval today for $500 a year, regardless of how large your cow herd is. That's an armload of T-post. That's an insignificant expenditure in the grand scheme of things to get this kind of knowledge. Again, I'm not here to hawk a particular program today. We're talking about something different. If you want to know how to do that, you can contact me later. And you get tremendous support, tech support, when it comes to doing this. The cons, it's going to take some time and labor. There just is no free lunch, and we know this. There is going to be a bit of a learning curve on any sort of data collection approach. And if considering who the service provider is, this expense can get a little too high to bear for certain folks, in particular in the cow-calf sector. So again, you got to think about your service provider a little bit. In the fourth approach to genetic knowledge for your herd, and that's when we couple the structured genetic eval approach that we just spoke about with pedigrees and phenotypes, and we couple it with DNA or genotype. That's it. That is the pinnacle of genetic awareness as we understand it in 2021 in animal agriculture. It gets no better. And if you have the ability and the appetite for this sort of data collection, you are going to have the most elite level of knowledge possible. That means in many cases, you could, in the window of 3 to 5 years, depends upon your outfit and what you have, you very well may know more about the genetics of your herd than the overwhelming majority of seed stock producers know about theirs. You will be at the absolute cutting edge of genetic knowledge on the bovine. And so it gets you the greatest amount of genetic knowledge. Again, you use those EPDs and indexes. It is as sharp a tool as exists for making selection and mating decisions. And then you can leverage that knowledge into marketing your cattle into certain ways. Again, the cost when you look at it as return on investment, can be very, very reasonable. Again, if you look at this as an input cost, again, this is a more one-on-one conversation. You can break this down to where it's fairly inexpensive for many folks to rationalize. Again, the support as well. The cons of this, again, it's going to take more time and labor. Again, that's just the way it is. The learning curve, and if not well thought out or with the wrong service provider, the cost can be just too much to bear for a lot of folks. And so there's a lot of what ifs and a lot of pieces to walk through to make this work right. But there are a lot of commercial folks. In fact, we have commercial clients now who are commercial cow-calf folks in Missouri with major outfits that are doing exactly what I described on the screen, and they're moving farther and faster than almost anybody in the beef business. So this isn't theoretical, this is real. But, as that note on the bottom said, it's only for those who are the most committed to utilizing data. It's not for those who want a quick fix. There is no silver bullet in the beef business. So it's your turn. From a data collection standpoint, in particular on the genetic side, we're in an era where you can capture everything that seed stock folks can capture. You just have to engage and start doing it. Also, you have some benefits. You actually have data that a lot of seed stock folks don't get or don't get much of. It's the commercial sector that has the carcass data. Folks who retain ownership and feed their own cattle, yes, some seed stock folks do that, but not a huge number of them. Plus, if they are doing it, many of them, they're better bulls, they're better genetics, went a different avenue. They didn't go into the feed yard. The commercial sector is doing that piece. Plus, that seed stock operator, that bull provider of yours, by design of what he's supposed to do, it is his or her job to turn their cows over faster, to continue to improve at a quick clip. So as a result, they don't keep cows around as long as you do. That's your job. Your job is to get the longevity-minded cow. And so you have some of the maternal metrics that the seed stock folks need. So as a result, the third bullet towards the bottom, you're in a time where for those of you who have enough numbers, you have enough critical mass, and you are serious about data capture and data acquisition, there are seed stock folks who want what you have. And that might come in the form they're willing to give you walking bulls for little or no money, or they'll provide you AI, they'll help you with the data collection. Not very far from you all at all. I actually know of an outfit who is doing exactly this. Essentially, they have gotten rid of all of their sire cost because folks are so eager to engage with them based on the fact that they harvest their own cattle, meaning they get carcass data and feedlot data, and they'll share that knowledge through a genetic eval, so everybody gets smarter. Everybody wants to know how their bull will do in that environment, so people are pumping semen and walking bulls into that program. As a result, that program is getting the cutting edge genetics. They're able to keep those daughters in their herd, so they're making cutting edge cows at the same time, essentially at no cost, and so it can be a win-win. So that's certainly not a one-off. There are many examples of that. So with that said, again, I told you at the beginning, my goal today wasn't to tell you how to do that. That's a conversation for another day, and it's going to be a little bit dependent upon each outfit and how you address those things. There are lots of different tools, lots of different services. My question today wasn't to tell you how, it was to give you and help you address your why. What is the truth about where we're going in the business, where you and your family are going in the business, and what are you prepared to do about it? So with that, if you have any questions, that's my contact information on the screen. I put it there very clearly so that you can use it. If you have questions that are specific, or they can be grander, they can be more industry-wide, or they can be specific to your operation, you reach out and we will help you start to source some answers for you specifically, you, your kids, your grandkids. And some of this information that I provided is at the link below. It's at the Beef Improvement Federation guidelines. Some of this came from an article that myself and a couple colleagues written that is posted there, and that's a direction to that particular article if you want to find it. Again, thank you for the courage for what you're doing, digging into the concept of what do I do next? I appreciate it. I look forward to our next visit. Thank you so much.